Wake up in the morning, brush your teeth, have breakfast, go to work, sleep, and repeat. Sound familiar? But what if all of this suddenly feels absurd and meaningless? Albert Camus called this the birth of absurd consciousness, the moment when you realize the universe is indifferent to you, that your efforts have no eternal meaning. Most people run from this truth, burying themselves in work or religion. But what if there's a third way? Camus invites us to rebel, not against life itself, but against attempts to impose a false meaning on it, to accept the absurd and still live life to the fullest. Sisyphus, rolling his stone uphill again and again, becomes a hero. Why? You're about to discover how to find freedom and dignity in a world without ready-made answers. This will change how you see everything. Get comfortable. We're starting our journey, but before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Part 1. The realization of life's absurdity. Picture waking up one day and suddenly seeing your routine as if you are noticing it for the first time. The alarm goes off, you brush your teeth, eat some breakfast, head to work, come back home, sleep, and then do it all over again the next day. In that instant, your whole routine feels strange and random. You start thinking, why am I doing all this? What's the point? Where's this all going? Suddenly, the usual comfortable assumptions that guide your daily life just don't hold up anymore. This is what Camus refers to as the birth of absurd awareness. It hits everyone without warning, often when you least expect it. Take a successful businessman, for example. He might all of a sudden question why he's spending 60 hours a week chasing after money he doesn't really need. Or a dedicated parent might start wondering if all their efforts for their kids really mean anything in a universe that's destined to end anyway. Even someone who's deeply religious might question whether their prayers are heard at all. These moments aren't signs that there's something wrong with you. Instead, they are glimpses into a basic truth about our lives that we usually try to ignore. Camus paints this realization with stark honesty. He talks about the guy who looks at his reflection in a phone booth window and feels oddly unfamiliar with himself. He describes the office worker who notes that he has 30 years of the same routine ahead of him, a thought that fills him with inexplicable dread. Then there are those times when the places we know like the back of our hands seem foreign, and people we are closest to suddenly appear like actors in a play we no longer understand. All these experiences have a thread in common: the sudden breakdown of the meanings and purposes that usually make life seem organized and worthwhile. But what is this absurdity that Camus marks as key to our existence? It's often misunderstood as life being silly or pointlessly meaningless. But Camus is pointing out something more specific and challenging. The absurd doesn't come from the world itself or just from how we think. Instead, it arises when our human longing for explanation, purpose, and ultimate meaning meets the world's complete silence. We are beings constantly seeking reasons for our existence, how we should live our lives, and whether what we do lasts. But the universe doesn't supply answers to these questions. Imagine it's like a cosmic conversation where only we're doing the talking. We ask the universe, why am I here? What's my purpose? Is there justice? Is there life after death? Do my choices matter? And what do we get in return? Only silence. It's not a spiteful or hostile silence, just an indifferent quiet from something unable to give the type of answers we want. This gap, where our questions clash with the universe's inability to answer, is where the absurd is born. Camus uses the myth of Sisyphus to illustrate this idea. Sisyphus, a king from Greek tales, is damned by the gods to eternally roll a boulder up a hill only for it to roll back down each time he nears the top. It looks like a story about penalty and hopelessness, but Camus sees something deeper. Sisyphus embodies every person who keeps living, working, and loving, fully aware that death will eventually undo all they've done. We build careers that end when we retire or die. We raise kids who will face the same challenges. We create art and write books that might one day be forgotten. We form bonds that death will sooner or later break. And yet, day after day, we keep pushing our boulder up that hill. The crucial takeaway here is that realizing this absurdity is just the start of truly living. Most people, when they catch a glimpse of life's absurd nature, hurry back to denial or distraction. They throw themselves into work with more intensity, dive into religious beliefs offering ultimate answers, or turn cynical and disengaged. But Camus offers another choice: fully acknowledge the absurd and decide to live anyway. Even though our lives don't hold any grand cosmic importance, we can still find them worthwhile. We might come to terms with the fact that we might not get answers to all our questions, yet we can choose to live passionately and be present in the moment. This idea is what Camus refers to when he talks about living without appeal. It means not seeking validation from outside forces, be it gods, philosophies, or political doctrines, to justify our existence or hand us predefined purposes. We take on the task ourselves to create whatever meaning and value our lives will have. It's not an easy mindset to adopt, as it doesn't offer any promises or reassurances that things will eventually fall into place. However, it does provide something incredibly valuable: the opportunity to live with complete honesty and authenticity. When we drop the facade of believing in a predetermined meaning to life, we're liberated to explore and find whatever meaning is really there. Understanding absurdity also uncovers a crucial aspect of being human. We're unique in our ability to pause and question the sense of our circumstances. A tree merely grows towards the sunlight without pondering why, and a lion hunts without questioning the bigger picture. Humans, however, have the rare ability to reflect on their own lives as if they were external observers, finding aspects of life puzzling or random. This capability for self-reflection is both a curse and a blessing. It traps us in the absurdity of recognizing our absurd situation, but it also opens up the chance for deliberate choice and genuine rebellion against the status quo. Camus points out that this sense of absurdity isn't a constant presence. Most of our days are filled with immediate tasks and concerns: paying bills, enjoying meals with friends, getting frustrated in traffic, losing ourselves in a good book, or listening to beautiful music. It's usually during quiet moments when we step away from our immediate activities to reflect that we are struck with the thought of life's absurdity. Such realizations may happen during mundane tasks like commuting or doing the dishes when our minds are free to roam. They might hit during significant life changes when once stable structures of understanding become shaky, or they might occur when we're confronted with death, either our own eventual demise or the loss of a loved one. What's crucial, Camus warns, is not to dismiss these realizations as mere depression or neurotic episodes. He argues that understanding life's absurdity serves as a sort of philosophical awakening, a jarring clarity that allows us to see past the comforting stories we often tell ourselves. These insights can be unsettling precisely because they are truthful, stripping away the typical narratives about progress, purpose, and ultimate meaning. They remind us of the fundamental truths about human life. We are temporary beings within an immense and indifferent universe, and eventually our individual lives will conclude without any grand cosmic event. But accepting these realities doesn't have to drive us into despair. Instead, they can serve as the groundwork for a more authentic and ultimately fulfilling way of living. Part 2. All right, now that we've got a handle on what Camus is getting at with this whole absurd thing, let's take another look at Sisyphus. This dude from ancient myths, who basically got stuck with a never-ending, pointless job, becomes a big-time symbol for human honor when facing life's pointless struggles, according to Camus. But why should we give a hoot about some guy from way back in Greek mythology? What's his story got to say to us folks living today in the 21st century? Camus' brilliance is in flipping our idea of what winning and losing really mean. At first sight, Sisyphus seems like the biggest loser. The gods totally played him, took his kingdom, and now he's stuck with the craziest, most pointless job you can think of. Each day, he works hard to shove a massive rock up a mountain. He hits his target every day, but then watches as the rock just rolls back down. If we think success is making something last, then Sisyphus is probably the biggest flop ever. But Camus wants us to picture Sisyphus on his way down to grab that rock again. It's this tiny break between efforts, a short breath between doing the same pointless thing over and over. In this break, Sisyphus is ahead of the rock because he knows what's up in ways a rock never could. He's fully aware of what's coming. More struggling, a bit more success, and more guaranteed letdowns. He doesn't fool himself into thinking permanent victory's coming, yet he keeps going. And it's there, in that commitment, where Camus spots something truly epic. To see Sisyphus as a hero, you gotta get what he's let go of and what he's hung on to. He's let go of hoping in the normal way. He's no longer banking on a big change, the gods taking it easy, or his rock just chilling at the top. He's ditched the dream of lasting achievements. Still, he's kept something more precious, his ability to make a conscious choice. Every day he could refuse the boulder. He could sit in defeat, rage against the gods, or try to wriggle out of his ordeal. But he doesn't. He chooses to dive into his task head first. This makes all the difference. Sisyphus stops being a victim of what's around him. Instead, he's taking charge of his own life. His punishment morphs into his mission. The sheer pointlessness turns into freedom. Because there's no outside check to see if he's succeeding, and no crowd's thumbs up needed, Sisyphus can make up his own reasons to keep going. Maybe he likes feeling the sun as he works. Maybe he appreciates his strength and the rhythm of his breaths. He can enjoy the view from the top, even if it's just a split second. He can find joy in giving his all, no matter what the end result might be. Now, when Camus says we need to picture Sisyphus being happy, it sounds like a joke or something. How can anyone be happy stuck in a loop of useless effort? But Camus isn't trying to be cheeky or confuse us on purpose. He's sharing a deep truth about what makes us satisfied. We usually think happiness comes from hitting our targets, grabbing what we want, or making lasting changes. But Sisyphus hints at another way, finding joy in how we throw ourselves into whatever life throws our way. Think about your life. Remember times when you were totally lost in something, maybe playing a sport, lost in a creative project, or having a heart-to-heart with someone special. In those moments, you probably weren't worrying about where it was heading or long-term gains. You were there, fully immersed, paying full attention to the here and now. That's the kind of engagement Camus sees in Sisyphus. The rock isn't just a roadblock to happiness. It's a chance to dive headfirst into life as it truly is. This leads to one of the biggies that Camus figured out about what makes us human. We aren't really built to always hit some ultimate goal to feel we're thriving. Instead, we need to feel like we're honestly ourselves, making real choices, and fully engaging with whatever life throws our way. The big sad part of life today isn't that we can't live forever or be super important in a cosmic sense. It's that we usually don't live fully in the time we've got. We spend so much of our energy chasing future dreams or obsessing over past mistakes that we overlook the simple act of living right now. Take Sisyphus, for example. His story gives us a fresh look at how to be human. He teaches us to live without needing others to validate us or having to justify our existence in some grand way. He shows that dignity isn't about having grand circumstances, but is about how we respond to whatever we face. Sisyphus makes it clear that one can be fully human, even when stripped of everything we typically think gives life its value. For him, what started as eternal punishment turns into this freedom from proving his worth to anyone, even to the gods who sentenced him. Albert Camus, who writes about Sisyphus, makes sure not to make his situation sound all sweet and dreamy. He doesn't say suffering is any good or suggest we should go looking for pointless tasks just because. The point isn't that pointless tasks are automatically worthwhile, but that we can change them through how we see them and the choices we make. Sisyphus can't pick his circumstances, but he can decide how he feels about them. While he can't control everything that happens, he controls his reaction to it, finding a type of freedom no outside force can take away. Camus calls this revolt, the bedrock of his whole philosophy. Revolt isn't about raging against everything with violence or shouting in the streets, though it might involve that sometimes. It's more about not letting life's uncontrollable situations crush you, maintaining your dignity, and keeping your ability to choose, even if those choices don't seem to change anything practical. Sisyphus doesn't resist by trying to escape his punishment or taking on the gods. He stays strong by not letting his punishment crush his spirit. He remains fully human, right where everything tries to strip away his humanity. This picture of Sisyphus pushing that giant boulder speaks to the repeating rhythm of life. We all have our own boulders, those daily duties that need doing over and over, those problems that keep popping back up, the challenges that seem never-ending. We go to work, come home, and repeat the cycle. We clean the house, just for it to get messy again. Solve a problem, and a new one shows up. We build relationships, and they always need care and attention. If you look at it one way, this repetition can feel a bit bleak, like we're stuck in never-ending cycles. But from Sisyphus's point of view, these repeats are chances for us to take on frequent challenges from new perspectives and to cherish simply being alive to face another day. Part 3. When folks face the absurdity of existence, Camus sees that there are typically three ways they might respond. It's important to get these responses because whichever we pick shapes how we live our lives completely. Each choice presents a unique way to deal with the clash between our human needs and the universe's indifference. Every response comes with its own logic, its appeal, and its consequences. The first path is physical suicide, which Camus calls the biggest philosophical issue out there. When people truly realize that maybe life's got no ultimate meaning, that their efforts might be largely futile, and that everything they do will be erased by death, a few might decide there's no reason to keep on living. If life's absurd, they think, why not just call it quits? If there's no grand purpose or divine plan to fulfill, no ultimate justice to make all our struggles worthwhile, why put up with the pain and hassle of existing? This response has a certain consistent logic. If meaning is what makes life worthwhile, and life indeed lacks meaning, then perhaps it's not worth living. But Camus fiercely argues against this idea. He believes physical suicide is a huge misunderstanding of what absurdity really tells us about human life. To Camus, the absurd doesn't mean life isn't worth living, but that we need a fresh approach to how we live. When we see that our existence isn't justified externally, it frees us to create our own reasons for living. Accepting that no outside authority will hand us ready-made purposes, we have the freedom to choose our own. The cosmic lack of meaning doesn't strip life of all meaning. It just means that any meaning has to come from humans, not divine or otherworldly sources. Plus, Camus notes that suicide actually goes against the very urge that drove us to recognize absurdity to begin with. We notice the absurd because we deeply care about meaning, purpose, and value. Our feeling that life's absurd stems from our intense desire to grasp our place in the world. Ending our lives because of this frustration is giving up on what makes us human, the capability to question, to explore, and to challenge easy answers. Suicide wipes out the absurd by removing the consciousness that sees it, but it's like solving a math problem by getting rid of the mathematician. The second road is what Camus calls philosophical suicide, and he finds it even more common and potentially more harmful than physical suicide. Philosophical suicide happens when people can't handle the burden of absurdity, and they jump to some kind of faith that promises to settle the clash between human desires and the universe's silence. This faith could be religious, such as believing in a God that gives life ultimate meaning and purpose. It might be political, like trusting in historical progress or revolution leading to a perfect society. It could also be metaphysical, believing in a cosmic order or universal principle that makes everything finally sensible. What these responses share is a refusal to live with uncertainty and a stubborn belief that ultimate answers exist somewhere. Camus acknowledges the temptation of philosophical suicide. Living with absurdity is truly tough. It asks us to act without assurance, to make choices without certainty, to invest in projects and relationships that might end up being meaningless. Believing God has a plan, or that history drives toward justice, or that the universe follows a kind design is more comforting. These beliefs offer guidance, comfort during hard times, and hope for the future. They give us a sense that our struggles link to a bigger purpose, that our pain has meaning, and that everything will eventually turn out all right. However, Camus argues philosophical suicide is essentially dishonest. It betrays the very intelligence that led us to understand the absurd in the first place. We can't unsee what we've realized about the universe's silence. We can't just decide to believe in things that our reasoning tells us are false or can't be backed up. Taking a leap of faith means we're putting aside the critical thinking that makes us human. It's like pretending the dark is light by simply closing your eyes. While this might bring comfort, it compromises intellectual integrity and stops us from truly engaging with the world as it is. Camus is especially critical of existential philosophers like Kierkegaard and Jaspers. They recognize life's absurdity, but then turn to religious faith as their answer. Camus thinks this approach is a contradiction, using logic to point out logic's limitations, but then deserting it when conclusions get too uncomfortable. He also takes issue with political ideologies that promise to solve all human problems through revolutionary change. These movements usually start by honestly addressing injustices and suffering, but then they build complex theories about historical progress that end up looking like secular religions. They tell us to give up current happiness for some perfect future, to accept present pain as necessary for eventual bliss. As Camus sees it, escaping from facing real life uses these ideologies as yet another means of avoidance. Rather than either or both of these options, Camus promotes a third path: revolt. Revolt means rejecting the escape from absurdity, not through suicide or false hope, but by deciding to live with the constant tension between our needs and the world's lack of answers. It's saying no to being crushed by life's absurdity, but also yes in acknowledging that this absurdity is a fundamental part of human existence. Revolt is neither giving up nor a rebellion. It's more nuanced, choosing authenticity within unavoidable limits. For Camus, revolt begins with clarity, seeing our situation for what it really is. We're temporary beings in a vast universe that doesn't appear to care about us. We will die, those we love will die, and one day both our species and the universe will end. Our actions won't have eternal outcomes, and our achievements won't last forever. Pain doesn't serve any grand cosmic plan. These realities may be harsh, but they're facts. Revolt starts with accepting them head-on. However, revolt isn't just about recognition. Once you've accepted life's basic absurdity, the next step is choosing to live regardless. And not just live, but live fully and passionately. This means engaging with life, not pulling back from commitments or relationships. It's about diving in deeper than those clinging to false hopes, because those living in revolt understand this life is all there is. There's no afterlife to make up for today's pains, and no future historical justification for today's sacrifices. Each moment is significant because no moment has any ultimate meaning beyond itself. Revolt also means crafting values, as Camus puts it. Since there are no external sources of purpose, it's up to us to create our own meanings. This isn't a random process, though. It's bound by our nature as humans sharing this planet. We can't just invent any values willy-nilly, because some support our flourishing, while others don't. Within these limits, however, we have true freedom to decide what matters, where we'll commit, and how we'll spend our finite time. This freedom can be both exciting and scary, since it means we're entirely responsible for shaping our lives. Part 4. Diving into Camus' take on false hope and finding freedom. Camus sees this thing called philosophical suicide as super risky. So to really get why he thinks that, we need to dive into the different ways it shows up and why it's just never the real deal. Humans have this deep-seated craving for life's ultimate meaning, and whole societies have been built trying to satisfy that itch. But Camus insists that these so-called solutions, even when they're offered with the best of intentions, end up totally falling flat. Think about how religion tackles absurdity. When life's meaning seems as thin as air and the universe is eerily quiet, religion steps in with this incredibly tempting offer. It lays out this idea that God has a grand plan. It tells you that your struggles aren't pointless. The big picture will eventually make sense. You're important because you're loved by the Creator, right? Death isn't the final curtain, but just a step to an eternal gig where all your burning questions get answered and all your pains get soothed. True justice? It's guaranteed, but maybe not in this life. All the sacrifices and tough times you face are part of this greater cosmic narrative that ends in ultimate goodness and truth. No doubt all this is pretty comforting. Religious faith takes all the ups and downs of life and gives them a shiny makeover. Pain becomes a stepping stone, death just a facade, and your life eternally important. You get this roadmap for how to live, courtesy of divine rules and traditions. Plus, you gain a community of folks who see the world through the same lens as you. With faith, no good deed goes unnoticed, no act of kindness forgotten, and every wrong will be set right eventually. But here's where Camus throws a wrench in the works. He argues that this whole setup comes with a hefty cost. Religion asks you to bank on stuff that doesn't have any hard facts backing it up, sometimes even clashing with what we know about the world. You're supposed to believe there's a loving reason behind experiences that seem downright random. You're expected to find meaning in natural disasters, illnesses, and human evils as part of God's bigger picture. It even requires believing that a totally good and all-powerful deity allows innocent suffering for some reason that's beyond human grasp. Sure, it can ease your mind, but it means putting a lid on the very reasoning that opened your eyes to life's absurdity. Moreover, religious faith can be like hitting the pause button on really living in the here and now. If life now is just a warm-up for what's next, the advice is more about enduring than diving into today's experiences. If pain is seen as transformational and joy could lead you astray, suddenly you're wary of happiness. If you find truth through belief rather than personal exploration, you'd lean on authority over what you see firsthand. According to Camus, this often leads to folks zoning out from reality, dodging the real responsibility of living life as it is. Now, you could say political ideologies are kind of like non-religious religions. They promise their own versions of life's ultimate purpose. Take Marxism. It tells us we're all on track towards a society free of class struggle, where alienation disappears and true freedom reigns supreme. Fascism speaks of returning to national glory and purity, restoring order to a world that's all over the place. And then there's liberal progressivism, assuring us that logic and science will eventually iron out all human woes, crafting a fair and wealthy world for all. Each of these grand schemes tackles real human worries, criticisms of how things are right now, and the hopes for a better tomorrow. They transform these ideas into epic tales about history's supposed direction and unavoidable progress. Just like religious beliefs, political ideologies offer solid answers to absurdity. They spell out why the world ticks the way it does and make bold calls about our future. They allow people to feel like they're part of something far bigger than themselves, a sweeping movement of history that'll keep rolling long after they're gone. They lay down clear lines on who's right or wrong, who's with the times or stuck in the past, and who's an ally or an adversary. They promise that the battles and hardships we're going through now will be justified by the triumphs awaiting us. They build communities of die-hard followers who share a common vision for humanity's future. However, Camus points out that political ideologies can be just as troublesome as religious beliefs when they turn into ways to dodge life's absurdities. These ideologies often demand that we believe things about human nature and history that lack solid evidence. They push us to forfeit current blessings for future gains that might never come. Frequently, they excuse horrible actions by referencing so-called higher aims. They create strict divisions between good and evil, between us and them, between the enlightened and the ignorant. The most dangerous aspect is they can lead to what Camus describes as logical murder, where real human lives are lost over abstract principles. Both religious and political philosophies promise too much. They assert they can solve life's deepest puzzles by offering ultimate solutions to questions that might just be unanswerable. They promise certainty in a world that naturally swings towards uncertainty. They offer some kind of universal approval of human endeavors that might not need any approval beyond themselves. By doing so, they urge us to pretend we know things we really don't, as if we have access to truths beyond our human grasp. Camus isn't saying all religious or political beliefs are inherently false or harmful. He acknowledges that individuals can hold such beliefs while still being aware of their limits and doubts. What he criticizes is turning these beliefs into overarching systems that claim to answer every question and resolve every inner conflict. He stands against using faith or ideology as a way to dodge the hard work of living truthfully amidst life's uncertainties. He criticizes any ideology that asks us to sideline our intellect or crush our ability to think critically. Camus suggests a simpler but more genuine alternative. Rather than chasing ultimate answers, we could learn to live content within our questions. We could take on the task of creating our own values instead of relying on universal approval for our choices. Instead of dodging the realities of human existence, we could fully embrace it. This mindset doesn't promise easy fixes or final peace, but it offers something incredibly valuable: the chance to live with complete honesty and intellectual courage. It allows us to stay true to our experiences while passionately engaging with the people and projects we genuinely care about. In Part 5, Camus dives into the idea of rebellion as the genuine human response, steering clear from suicide and false hopes. But when Camus talks about rebellion, he's not picturing riots or anger-fueled protests. No, he means something way deeper and way more transformative. It's the innate human act of standing up against a universe that couldn't care less about us. In Camus' mind, rebellion is what really sets us apart as humans. He defines a rebel as someone who says no, but this isn't just an outright refusal or negativity for the sake of it. The rebel's no is to certain things, all the while screaming yes to values that those things mess with. Like when a slave finally chooses not to follow an order, it's not just about wanting to be difficult. They're saying there's a line that shouldn't be crossed, asserting their dignity, their rights, and their true nature. So when you hear no, there's an underlying yes to something way more valuable than just going along for the ride. Rebellion, then, is about figuring out what's important by pinpointing what you can't accept. It teaches you what you're about through what you stand against. Someone who's never rebelled has never fully figured out their own beliefs. If you accept everything as it comes, how will you know what really matters to you? Rebellion makes us clear about our stands and pushes us to own our choices. But here's the kicker in Camus' take. Real rebellion isn't about each person doing their own thing. When a slave stands up, they're not just talking about their rights, they're speaking for the rights of anyone in the same boat. They're shouting no to all mistreatment, not just their own. Their fight for dignity translates to human dignity across the board. Camus has this light bulb moment. Rebellion naturally builds solidarity. A rebel gets that they're not alone. Others share their struggles and deserve the same respect. Switching from I rebel to we exist isn't just a jump. It's a natural move. If my rebellion is about human values, not just personal wishes, it means I have to support others fighting for the same reasons. If I want dignity, I have to see it in others too. If I don't accept certain conditions for me, I can't stand by while others face them. This takes rebellion beyond personal bounds into social and political realms. A true rebel can't just make things better for themselves while letting others suffer, nor can they demand rights and deny others theirs. They can't battle oppression in one spot but allow it elsewhere. Real rebellion pushes us to work towards a world where everyone's dignity is recognized and respected, holding all of us accountable not just for ourselves, but for creating a world where authenticity thrives for everyone. Still, Camus makes sure to separate true rebellion from those who want to completely upend reality. Rebels see limits and work within our human constraints to make things better, without dreaming of a total overhaul. Revolutionaries, on the other hand, often chase ideals of perfect justice or absolute freedom, wanting to wipe the slate clean instead of just fixing the issues. They start seeing people as tools to this big ideal rather than individuals. This is key to getting Camus' political views. He's all for standing against injustice and needless suffering. He's got this clear idea that people have both the right and the duty to stand up against situations that strip them of their self-respect. Yet he's not on board with those radical movements that claim they'll fix all of humanity's problems by drastically changing society. He figures those movements usually end up just swapping old problems for new, often nastier forms of oppression. While the rebel wants to make things better within the current system, the revolutionary dreams of wiping the slate clean entirely. The true rebel knows their fight isn't foolproof and doesn't go around acting like they have all the answers or that their cause is infallible. They're open to feedback, ready to own up to mistakes, and willing to shift their stance if something new or more convincing comes along. They realize rebellion isn't a one-and-done deal, but an ongoing way of life. This humility is what sets genuine rebellion apart from fanaticism, keeping it grounded in the real messiness of human life. Camus uses the story of the early 20th century Russian revolutionaries, like Ivan Kalyaev and his pals, to make his point. These folks thought that knocking off government officials was needed to push justice forward. But they also felt that taking a life, no matter the intent, was a grave act that needed an equal price. When they killed, they expected to pay with their own lives. They didn't try to brush off their actions with excuses about destiny or revolutionary rights. Instead, they took on the moral burden and were fully ready to face the consequences. They were prepared to swap their own lives for those they ended. Camus dubs them fastidious assassins because they held on to their moral qualms even while doing violence they thought was necessary. They didn't become numb to killing or see human life as something that could be tossed aside. They focused their violence on those in power and went out of their way to avoid hurting innocent folks. Crucially, they never claimed their cause justified any and all methods or that the outcome would make any actions okay. They stayed as rebels instead of switching to the revolutionary track because they never lost sight of the human values driving their resistance. This story helps to make sense of Camus' idea of rebellion with limits. Genuine rebellion never loses track of its foundation, which is respect for human dignity, even among adversaries. It gets that how we go about reaching our goals becomes part of those goals. It gets that compassion can't be built with brutality as the cornerstone. It insists on sticking to moral boundaries, even when those make success tougher or less certain. It chooses to remain human rather than try to become all-powerful, to operate within limits rather than attempt to blow right past them. Part 6. All right, let's dive into what makes Albert Camus' philosophy so interesting, how he links the personal struggle against life's absurdities with a bigger drive for human connection and fighting for what's right in society. It's not just a jump from one point to another that doesn't make sense. It's more of a natural shift that stems from what true rebellion is all about. Take a moment to think about how rebelling against what you're going through personally can lead you to understand that others are in the same boat. Say a worker is fed up with unsafe conditions and decides enough is enough. They soon realize other workers are dealing with the same issue. Or when a student refuses to accept unfair treatment from those in charge, it's clear other students are also facing the same. And when someone shouts against government corruption, it's a revelation that this kind of corruption spreads its tentacles to grip everyone in the society. So what at first seemed like individual battles open up to uncover social injustices and oppression lurking beneath the surface. But rebellion isn't just about you and your immediate surroundings. It digs deep into what it means to be human, beyond just one person's situation. By standing up, we're not just claiming, I deserve better, but rather, everyone in my shoes should have better. It's about reaching out past our own interests, calling on a universal sense of human dignity. When a rebellion is genuine, it can't help but align with ideas that speak to what everyone deserves. This fascinating idea is captured in Camus' words, I rebel, therefore we exist. It's a twist on Descartes' I think, therefore I am. And it points to the basic truth that we're all bonded by shared values and the common issues we tackle. Rebellion isn't just confirming I'm here, but more like acknowledging we all face this together. It challenges the idea of human beings as solitary beings and shows us as a part of a larger group, all seeking dignity, respect, and meaningful engagement with life. The bond Camus is talking about doesn't rely on shared backgrounds or cultures. It's a deeper connection. It's about all of us as conscious beings facing a world that doesn't offer easy answers. We're all going to die someday. We all ask big questions that the universe doesn't answer for us. We're all tasked with making meaning for ourselves without a guide. Everyone grapples with the choice between despair, false hopes, and genuine rebellion. Our shared human condition paves the way for what Camus calls a metaphysical solidarity, which is a strong link that cuts across the differences that normally split us apart. But this connectedness isn't just some lofty, abstract idea floating on a cloud. It means something real about how we should treat each other and how we should set up our societies. If we all share the same foundational human experiences and deserve basic respect, then we can't get away with systems that only respect a few while ignoring others. When rebellion stands for universal values, it naturally creates a duty to support those who fight for the same reasons we do. If we lay claim to certain rights, it's fair to extend those rights to everyone who's part of our human family. So Camus invites us into what he calls the ethics of rebellion. This isn't ethics built on religious doctrines or abstract theories about human nature. Nope. It comes directly from the genuine experience of saying no to what we just can't take and yes to values we hold on to tightly. It's rooted in our day-to-day lives and the experiences we actually live through. It grows from practicing rebellion rather than just talking about it. It sticks to real human needs, avoiding floating off into the land of pure ideas. In doing so, this ethics of rebellion comes with its unique features. First off, it's all about keeping it real and humble in its approach. It doesn't claim to fix every issue humans face or get rid of suffering altogether. It accepts that life comes with its tragedies, losses, and inevitable end that no amount of social change or personal effort can fully conquer. The goal is to cut back on unnecessary pain without pretending we can wipe it out entirely. It aims to open up more chances for people to live with dignity, but stops short of saying we can achieve a perfect state of dignity. Next up, the ethics of rebellion plays on a global scale, but needs practical actions in specific spots. It insists everyone deserves respect and consideration, yet admits this respect has to come through concrete actions in real-life situations. There are some core ideas like the importance of dignity, the need to lessen suffering, and the protection of freedom, but it doesn't hand out a detailed manual for applying these principles everywhere. Instead, it calls for a bit of common sense and ongoing decision-making, rather than just following a strict set of rules. Moreover, the ethics of rebellion is designed to keep itself in check. It understands that rebels can become tyrants if they forget the values that sparked their rebellion in the first place. The methods used to reach their goals should align with those goals. In other words, we can't make the world kinder by resorting to cruelty. It's got built-in warnings against the kind of fanaticism that lets today's humankind suffer for some ideal future. Then, it sees rebellion as something continual, a lifestyle instead of a one-time event or a final destination. It's a journey, not a landing. Every new generation needs to figure out for themselves what they won't stand for and what things are worth fighting for. Each individual has to discover through their own experiences what it means to live sincerely and ethically. This way of understanding ethics can't just be passed down neatly from one generation to the next. It needs to be revived and reshaped to fit changing times. This take on ethics carries a lot of weight for the way politics and society are set up. Camus has a soft spot for democratic institutions, not because they're flawless, but because they allow for continuous pushback against abuse of power. He stands up for free speech, not because every opinion holds equal truth, but because the ability to say no is a cornerstone of human dignity. He's all for individual rights, not because people as individuals matter more than their communities, but because safeguarding individuals is key to upholding the values that communities are meant to embody. His political thoughts lean more towards practicality rather than lofty ideals, are more about making things better instead of complete overhaul, and are focused on reducing harm rather than chasing after perfection. Part 7. In developing his philosophy on rebellion, Camus grew increasingly wary of the shift from genuine rebellion to the more ominous notion of total revolution. The difference between the two is significant, touching on the core of how we should approach injustice and suffering. Grasping this difference is key for anyone aiming to stand against oppression without becoming oppressive themselves. Rebellion, as we've discussed, starts with real complaints about specific issues. The rebel rejects certain behaviors, laws, or abuses of power. Their fight is targeted and finite, focused on altering certain circumstances rather than rebuilding the entire world. They aim to make life more humane within the existing human framework without trying to completely change it. Rebels keep things in perspective, acknowledging that while perfect justice is unattainable, more justice is always possible. They recognize their own limited understanding, imperfect methods, and the uncertainty of their success. On the other hand, revolution becomes swept up in the fantasy of complete change. Revolutionaries aren't satisfied with simply improving conditions within the current system. They seek a brand new system. They don't just aim to reduce suffering, they want to erase it. They don't merely wish to increase freedom, they desire total freedom. They aren't striving for more justice, but demand absolute justice. Revolutionaries lose sight of the limits that keep rebellion grounded in reality and begin to dream in terms of endless possibilities and ultimate fixes. Camus tracks this shift through the history of modern revolutions, focusing on the French and Russian revolutions. Both revolutions started with valid complaints about real oppression. Both were driven by a genuine concern for human dignity and social fairness. Both drew in idealistic individuals eager to put aside their own interests for a better world. However, both eventually got caught up in their own pursuit of total transformation, leading to new forms of oppression that often were worse than the previous problems. The French Revolution began with calls for basic political rights, economic fairness, and social equality, reasonable goals tackling true societal issues. But the revolutionary effort eventually expanded beyond these original demands. Revolutionaries came to believe their goals required not only political changes, but an entire overhaul of human nature. Existing institutions, traditions, and even mindsets turned into hurdles to be removed rather than problems to be addressed. They started thinking that creating a just society meant destroying the old ways and starting anew. This led to what Camus dubs as the logic of the guillotine. When an old order is viewed as completely flawed and a new order must be flawless, anyone representing the old or questioning the new becomes an enemy to be removed. If transforming human nature is essential, then those who resist are seen as barriers to progress that can't be tolerated. If the revolutionary cause is perceived as entirely moral, any opposition to it is deemed wholly evil, warranting no compassion. Enemies became convinced that their cause was so noble that any means were justified to achieve it. They lost track of the human values that initially fueled their rebellion, becoming willing to sacrifice real people for abstract ideals. The Russian Revolution followed a similar trajectory. It started with legitimate grievances against an oppressive and ineffective czarist regime. Russian citizens suffered from poverty, political repression, and social inequality that desperately needed reform. The Bolsheviks vowed to forge a society without class divisions, free from exploitation and alienation. In their quest for human liberation, they envisaged a world free from all the conflicts and sufferings that have troubled humanity all along. But this dream of a perfect society demanded actions that actually went against the principles they aimed to uphold. Lenin and his crew thought that wiping out the current class structures was necessary for a classless society. This involved not only changing economic dynamics, but also getting rid of entire groups labeled as class enemies. So, folks like the kulaks, the bourgeois class, the nobility, and eventually anyone who dared to question party beliefs ended up on a list for removal. They justified these drastic measures by claiming it was all for the historical necessity and the greater good of mankind. Their reasoning was that some short-term violence and oppression were justifiable to attain long-lasting peace and freedom. Yet those so-called temporary actions lingered, and the methods employed for liberation turned out to be as oppressive as what they aimed to replace. Camus suggests that these grim outcomes weren't mere mistakes or betrayals of revolutionary ideals, but rather the natural fallout of revolutionary thought. When we start seeking absolute fixes for human issues, we begin to view people who don't fit those fixes as problems needing solving, rather than individuals deserving respect. Once we convince ourselves that we know where history is heading, we end up treating people as mere tools for reaching that goal instead of being valued for themselves. When our cause seems to represent perfect justice, any opposition starts to look like complete injustice, undeserving of any fairness. Revolution, therefore, breeds its own logic that spirals into fanaticism and terror. On the flip side, the rebel, as Camus describes, holds on to a philosophy of limitations. This rebel understands that human understanding has its boundaries and that flawless solutions to human troubles are merely a dream. They know that while improving situations is achievable, eradicating all issues is not. They see value in reducing suffering but know that wiping it out entirely isn't something humans can do. They realize their methods have flaws and their motivations aren't always clear-cut. This acknowledgement keeps rebellion grounded in real human experiences and stops it from becoming extreme and fanatical. The philosophy of limits also stresses that the ways and the ends must harmonize. We can't aim for a more humane world using methods that are inhumane. Justice can't be achieved through ongoing injustice, nor can a free society be built on complete oppression. The way we reach our objectives becomes intertwined with the objectives themselves, shaping the society we end up with and the people we become. If we resort to violence, deceit, and hatred to fight those same things, we end up just replicating what we claim to oppose. However, this isn't to say that rebels should never resort to force or that all methods should be seen as equally valid. Camus acknowledges that sometimes violence might be necessary to combat greater violence, and that deceit might sometimes be required to counter systematic lies. He insists, though, that such actions should be taken reluctantly, with restraint, and with a full awareness of their ethical implications. Any rebel resorting to violence should bear the burden of that violence and accept the responsibility for it. They shouldn't just hide behind excuses like historical necessity or abstract principles, but instead accept that they're doing something harsh to prevent something even worse. They should strive to remain human and grounded rather than assuming a godlike demeanor, appreciating there are limits they shouldn't aim to surpass entirely. Part 8. The Stranger and the Art of Living with Indifference. To really grasp how Camus' ideas play out in real life, we can look at his books, especially his novel The Stranger. In this story, Camus introduces us to Meursault, who he sees as an absurd hero. Meursault is someone who lives without pretending there's a big purpose in life, yet doesn't fall into despair over that absence. Through Meursault, Camus captures both the freedom and the challenges of living honestly in a world that doesn't make sense. The opening line of The Stranger is among the most famous. "Today, Mother died." What's striking about this line isn't the death itself, but Meursault's seeming lack of concern over it. He's not even exactly sure if his mother died today or the day before. He attends the funeral but doesn't cry, skips the vigil, and doesn't act the way people expect him to act in grief. Right from the start, Meursault comes across as someone who doesn't follow society's emotional or social rules. But Camus makes it clear that Meursault's indifference isn't about being heartless or cruel. He cared for his mother in his own way and looked after her when she needed it. He just doesn't feel a need to fake feelings he doesn't truly experience or follow social norms that don't fit him. In a world where many people constantly put on a show of feelings and meanings they don't actually hold, Meursault's honesty about what he truly feels seems strange and even unsettling. This attitude carries on throughout the first part of the book. Meursault goes to the beach, starts a fling with Marie, and gets sucked into his neighbor Raymond's drama with Raymond's girlfriend. In each part of his life, he deals with what's right in front of him without turning everything into a big story about deeper meanings or future consequences. When Marie asks if he loves her, he says probably not. When she asks about marriage, he says it doesn't matter to him, but he's willing if she wants. When Raymond wants help writing a letter to get back at his girlfriend, Meursault says sure, without agonizing over it. Once again, Camus shows us that Meursault's actions aren't because he lacks morals or emotions. He enjoys being with Marie, has real fondness for her, and appreciates their physical connection. He experiences the world vividly, feeling the sun's heat, the water's chill, the taste of food. He can be a friend, show kindness, and be loyal. What's missing is the urge to turn these experiences into big romantic or moral narratives. He lives in the right now, without constantly looking ahead to an imaginary future or reminiscing about an idealized past. The turning point hits when Meursault ends up killing an Arab man on the beach. This act isn't planned, it just happens in the moment, driven by a string of events rather than a clear intention. Meursault's walking on the beach and runs into the guy who had a fight with Raymond earlier. Overwhelmed by the sun's heat and its reflection off the man's knife, Meursault fires a shot, then pauses and fires more. Later, he can't really explain why he did it. It feels like the scene itself, sun, heat, tension, acted through him instead of him acting with intention. The novel's second half takes us to Meursault's trial, where Camus reveals the deeper point of his story. The legal system isn't truly focused on the details of the shooting or what happened beforehand. Rather, they're fixated on Meursault himself, particularly how he acted during his mother's funeral. The prosecutor argues that someone who doesn't show emotion at such a time could be capable of anything. Meursault is judged not for the shooting but for who he is, for not fitting into the roles of a grieving son or a remorseful killer. During the trial, different people speak about Meursault's character. His boss notes that Meursault wasn't ambitious and seemed happy with his job as it was. Marie talks about their time together, but her words get twisted around, making Meursault seem unfeeling and heartless. The guy from his mom's care home mentions that Meursault wasn't interested in seeing his mom's body and didn't shed any tears at her funeral. Every bit of this is used to paint him as someone who just doesn't feel or follow what's expected. The prosecutor even calls him Monsieur Antichrist, arguing that his lack of care for social norms makes him a threat to everyone. Camus uses this whole trial scene to highlight how society often punishes those who are real and reward those who just put on a show. You know, if Meursault had just cried at the funeral, shown some regret for the shooting, and acted like he was driven by jealousy or anger or any typical emotion, he could have gotten off easier. But no, he wouldn't put on that act or tell the kind of story that would fit for everyone else. So they see him as someone completely out of place. The court just can't handle his honesty about how random his actions were and how there's no deeper meaning behind what he did. While he's waiting in prison for the final day, Meursault starts to see things more clearly. A priest comes by, trying to convince him to turn to God, to give his suffering some meaning, and to prepare for an afterlife where everything supposedly makes sense. But Meursault isn't having it. He outright refuses to cling to these ideas. He's come to accept the absurdity of his life and doesn't want any fake solace or made-up meanings. He'd rather choose bleak honesty over comforting lies. He prefers to face death without any illusions than live with beliefs he knows are lies. As the story wraps up, Meursault reaches a sort of calm. He accepts his circumstances without bitterness or hope. He sees that the universe doesn't care about his existence, that his life doesn't hold any grand importance, and his death won't change anything significant in the world. But coming to this realization is freeing for him because it removes the pressure to find some grand purpose or justification for his life. He can simply appreciate that he has lived, felt, and connected, even if it was brief and didn't leave a mark. He welcomes what he describes as the universe's gentle indifference, finding a peculiar solace in it. Meursault, in Camus' eyes, is an absurd hero because he lives truly within the bounds of life's absurdity. He doesn't try to escape through death or false hope. He doesn't pretend his life holds meanings it doesn't, or that his actions have purposes they don't. He takes ownership of his choices, but without saying external forces or ultimate truths made them right or wrong. He faces death without looking for comfort and also without falling into despair. He shows what it might mean to be fully human, even stripped of all those things people normally think give life meaning. The Stranger lays out both the allure and the cost of living without lies. Meursault's openness is like a breath of fresh air in a world filled with pretense and fake feelings. His acceptance of life's absurdity is dignified and even brave. His refusal to fake emotions or take on beliefs he doesn't truly hold shows a kind of purity most can't match. But being real also leaves him lonely and exposed to a society that can't deal with too much truth about what it is to be human. Living life as an absurd hero, Camus seems to say, is doable, but it's tough and comes with big sacrifices. Part 9. How People Came Together in Hard Times. In Albert Camus' The Plague, he shifts the focus from the personal struggles found in The Stranger to how whole communities tackle senseless hardship together. The story is set in Oran, a city in Algeria, during a devastating outbreak of bubonic plague. The novel vividly captures both the bleak reality of an epidemic and symbolically stands in for any scenario where chaos and disaster seem to strike out of the blue. The plague in this case is a stark reminder of life's unpredictability, the limits of human control, and our own mortality. At the start of the book, there's a slow, dawning realization that something's amiss in Oran. It begins with rats dying in droves, soon followed by humans falling sick with symptoms that baffle doctors. The local government is hesitant to acknowledge the crisis for what it is, shying away from the terrifying word plague. Instead, they hide behind softer language and medical jargon, trying to make it all seem manageable and short-lived. But soon enough, the grim reality hits hard. The city is grappling with an outbreak that will kill thousands and isolate the survivors from the outside world. Camus uses this epidemic backdrop to show how different people react to senseless disaster. Take Rambert, a journalist stuck in Oran when the lockdown begins. His initial reaction is to escape the chaos and get back to Paris, where his lover awaits. He spends much of the story scheming to break free from quarantine to return to his old life. His actions echo our basic human instinct to sidestep pain and seek the comfort of the familiar, even when circumstances make it nearly impossible. Then there's Father Panelou, a Jesuit priest who tries to explain the upheaval through the lens of faith. He delivers a sermon claiming the plague is divine punishment for sin, framing it as part of God's bigger picture where good will come if people remain penitent and faithful. This response shows our common desire to weave our suffering into a story that makes sense, one that aligns with justice or purpose. Yet as the plague rages on and innocent children die, Father Panelou's confidence starts to crack. By the novel's end, his speeches are less about certainty and more about the mysteries of life. Other characters like Grand, a municipal clerk, deal with the turmoil by diving into personal fixations. Grand is absorbed in writing a novel, endlessly tweaking his first sentence without getting any further. His meticulous habit offers a form of escape from the chaos around him. He represents those who manage adversity by zeroing in on small, manageable tasks, activities that might provide comfort and a sense of achievement, but also risk becoming a shield against confronting reality head-on. The true heroes of the novel, however, are the ones who take the fight to the plague itself, accepting the daunting challenge despite knowing it's a losing battle. Dr. Ryu, who narrates the story, dedicates himself to treating patients and curbing the disease's spread. Jean Thoreau sets up volunteer squads to keep public health in check. Even Rambert eventually puts aside his personal desires to join the communal effort against the epidemic. What's powerful is that these characters don't resist the plague because they believe in a final victory or because they think their actions are part of some grand cosmic scheme. They push back because it's the right thing to do when faced with unjust suffering. Camus emphasizes that the plague, like any epidemic, will run its course regardless of human action. Diseases follow natural paths, largely immune to human interference. The novel's heroes aren't lauded for saving Oran, but are remembered for refusing to accept avoidable hardships. They grasp that while they can't defeat death or avert every tragedy, they can soften the immediate blow for those suffering alongside them. They engage in the struggle without expectations of triumph or the despair of inevitable defeat. Their efforts are meaningful just because they are, and not really because of what they might lead to. In Iran, the plague creates this rare kind of togetherness among folks. All those social differences that usually keep people apart just don't matter when everyone is up against the same danger. It doesn't matter if someone is rich or broke, got a fancy education or none at all, is super religious or not. Everyone is breathing the same toxic air and facing the same deadly risk. This plague kind of forces people to see they're all on the same level as human beings who need each other just to get by. Camus refers to this as a shared experience of suffering, going beyond the usual barriers of class, culture, and belief. But this kind of unity doesn't just happen on its own. It's something that only comes about when folks choose to see how similar their situations are and decide to take care of each other. Some people in Iran turned more inward and selfish during the epidemic, stocking up and keeping their distance from others. Meanwhile, some find within themselves a surprising amount of kindness and bravery they didn't know was there. The plague doesn't automatically make people good or bad, but it sure does show what they're capable of when all those usual social supports are gone and they're pushed to confront the big questions about living life. Dr. Rao is kind of the example of how Camus thinks one should deal with suffering that makes no sense. He's a doctor, not because he thinks medicine will fix all things human, but because helping to heal is a deeply human act that upholds human dignity amidst sickness and death. He treats his patients fully aware that many of them may not make it, no matter what he does. He keeps detailed accounts of the outbreak, understanding that future generations might face the same. Even when he's in the midst of a huge tragedy affecting a lot of people, he still cares about individual human lives. His dedication is both humble and whole. He'll do whatever he can with what he knows and the tools he has, without pretending he can do more than that. The plague also stands as a metaphor for when the Nazis took over France, something Camus directly experienced while being part of the resistance. Like the plague, Nazism was this kind of outbreak of cruelty affecting entire societies. Just like the plague, it brought about situations where usual moral and social connections fell apart, and people had to decide if they'd go along with it, run from it, or fight against it. And just like the plague, it led people to truly figure out what they found important and what they were willing to give up to defend those things. The book conveys that fighting back against any sort of destructive force, whether it's a literal epidemic or a political one, needs similar traits: coming together, sticking it out, and being ready to take action without any promises of success. However, the plague isn't just about these overwhelming events like epidemics or wars. It's also about the everyday disasters that touch every human life: sickness, getting old, losing things and people, and death. Every one of us lives with a sort of separation from the final answers about why we exist and what it's all for. We all deal with threats to our health, our relationships, and our plans that we just can't fully control or make sense of. The plague dramatically echoes the usual human state of being, which inherently includes being vulnerable to forces we cannot entirely grasp or influence. The insights the characters gain about sticking together and resisting aren't just for those big emergencies, but apply to the ongoing struggle of living genuinely in an unsure world. Part 10. Building Morals in a Universe Without God. One of the toughest parts of Camus' ideas is how he tries to make sense of ethics without calling on God, big metaphysical ideas, or lofty theories about human nature. If there's no God, the universe doesn't give us any moral compass. And if human reasoning can't nail down what's right or wrong, how do we figure out ethical behavior? How do we set up meaningful moral principles when it looks like there's no solid ground for them? Camus pushes aside the notion that without God, we just fall into moral chaos or a free-for-all where anything goes. He believes ethics can come from our own life experiences. No need for some cosmic okay or outside checkmark. The main takeaway here is that we create moral values through the decisions we make and the promises we keep, not by stumbling upon them like scientific facts. This doesn't mean they're random or just personal, because some values support human well-being, while others break it down. Some lifestyles encourage respect and togetherness, while others lead to harm and loneliness. We can judge different ethical ideas based on what they actually do for people in the real world. The ethics that Camus describes has a few special traits. First, it's rooted in real human life, not in abstract theories. We figure out what matters to us by identifying what we can't stand, what we'll defend, and what we're ready to give up on behalf of our beliefs. Our values come out through how we react in particular situations, not by working them out from broad principles. Because of this, ethics is an ongoing journey rather than a set-in-stone set of rules. We don't have a full list of beliefs from the start to apply them in different cases. Instead, we find out what we truly believe when life tests us. Second, Camus' take on ethics can be applied broadly, but isn't claiming to be the ultimate truth. When we push back against situations we can't accept, we suggest that anyone else in our shoes would probably feel just as we do. Our push against wrong situations stems from values that go beyond our own likes or personal gains. We're not just saying we deserve better, we're saying humans in general do. This gives our ethical beliefs a universal scope without needing to claim we know ultimate truths. We can say some actions are right or wrong without needing to fully grasp what makes them so. Third, this ethical view is humble and knows its limits. It's not about solving all moral issues or putting an end to ethical debates. It admits moral insight is never complete, and ethical choices often mean picking between tough, opposing values. It recognizes that decent people can have different views on big matters, and that though moral progress can happen, it'll never be totally complete. This humility guards against the kind of moral arrogance that thinks it knows all about good and evil, leading to justifying any means for so-called perfect goals. Fourth, Camus's ethics emphasize the need for our means to match our ends. We can't make a kinder world using harsh methods. You can't aim for justice using tactics of injustice or freedom by oppressing people. The way we aim for our goals becomes part of those goals, influencing both the outcomes and who we become in the process. This rule offers practical pointers for making ethical choices without needing tons of theory. We can look at actions and consider if they align with the things they're claiming to achieve. These ideas have real-world effects on how we treat others and set up our communities. If human dignity comes from our power to make choices and stand up to what's unbearable, then our societies should be designed to guard and broaden these abilities. If we find a sense of unity in acknowledging that we're all mortal in a universe that doesn't care, then it's important to push back against systems that split people into hierarchies of moral importance. True resistance means having the freedom to reject established power, so we should cherish political setups that allow this kind of pushback. Camus' thoughts on ethics stretch into our perception of justice too. Justice can't be flawless because humans don't know everything, and our systems make mistakes. However, justice can be measured by how well it preserves human dignity and supports real freedom of choice. A just community isn't one that erases all suffering or resolves every conflict, but one that reduces needless suffering and deals with genuine complaints. It's one that makes room for rebellion, directing it in positive rather than destructive ways. This approach to justice is why Camus supports democratic systems, not because they promise perfect outcomes, but because they're best at correcting wrongs over time. In democracies, people can challenge authority legally, push for change without violence, and hold leaders accountable. They're well set up for peaceful changes in leadership and protect minority rights from majority domination. They're not perfect, but they're preferable to setups that hoard power with those claiming to know the absolute truth about justice. Camus values individual rights not because individuals trump communities, but because safeguarding individuals is crucial for a genuine community. Freedoms like speech, thought, and assembly are key because they let people identify and communicate their core values. Without these freedoms, people can't truly rebel or build solid connections with others. Societies suppressing individual rights for collective goals usually end up damaging both personal dignity and real community. The ethos of rebellion also guides our personal lives and actions. If authenticity matters, we should aim to be truthful about our feelings and motives. If solidarity is important, we should be ready to uphold those facing challenges like our own. If dignity is a value, we must treat others as ends in themselves, not just tools for our aims. If rebellion is a priority, we must be able to reject conditions we can't tolerate, even when it's tough or pricey. But Camus doesn't offer a detailed guidebook for every conflict or a formulaic answer to every moral problem. His ethics demand sensible decision-making, constant evaluation, and a readiness to own the outcomes of our decisions. It invites us to shape our values by living them, not just by pondering them. It calls us to stay true to our own experiences, but also to be open to learning from others. It's an engaged, committed approach rather than a detached, isolated one. It doesn't promise absolute assurance, but offers a way to live with integrity and purpose, even in a universe indifferent to our struggles. In Part 11, Art and Creation as Acts of Rebellion, Camus talks about how making art is one of the deepest ways to rebel against the absurdity of human life. Artists, like everyone else, find themselves in a world that doesn't answer our big questions or give life any ultimate purpose. But instead of giving up or getting lost in false dreams, artists choose to bring something new into the world. They turn their personal experiences into creations that speak to people across different times and places. Through this, they show that our minds can bring some order to chaos and maybe even some sense to what seems meaningless. Creating art is much like Sisyphus rolling his rock up the mountain. Artists know their work won't last forever, that it won't solve life's big mysteries or serve any bigger purpose than itself. Yet they keep at it because creating is meaningful in its own right, no matter the end result. Whether it's a writer crafting a story, a painter working on a piece, or a musician composing tunes, these are all very human acts that highlight the importance of awareness and choice in a world that doesn't care. However, Camus suggests not all art furthers true rebellion. Some art becomes an escape, offering imaginary worlds that falsely comfort rather than confront our real situations. Romantic art can be like a drug, making life seem nicer than it is, while religious art promising transcendence might become a way of giving up on understanding our human condition. Even political art can lose its way, focusing too much on ideology over the real human stories that give art its power. For Camus, real art finds a balance. It's honest about life's hardships, but also celebrates what's possible for humans. It doesn't fool us into thinking life is more meaningful than it is, nor does it fall into bitterness. It brings up suffering but doesn't drown in it, realizes limits but isn't stuck because of them, and accepts mortality without being obsessed by it. Great art helps us understand our situation better, while also letting us see the beauty and dignity that are still possible. Camus finds this balance in artists he admires, from the Greeks of old to more recent writers. Greek tragedies, for instance, show characters in impossible situations facing unavoidable pain, yet they still reflect human dignity and beauty in the universe. These plays don't give us simple answers, but they do show that even in horrible situations, people can act with bravery and dignity. They highlight our ability to choose and be conscious, which is what makes tragedy possible at all. In the same way, Camus respects writers like Dostoevsky, who dive into the darkest parts of human life without losing hope in human potential. Dostoevsky's stories don't shy away from moral dilemmas, deep psychological pain, or soul-searching questions, but his works celebrate life instead of advocating for despair. They present characters wrestling with life's big questions, showing both human flaws and greatness, illustrating that the quest for meaning has merit, even if it doesn't yield final answers. Artists who truly challenge the absurdity of life create works that help others live more sincerely within their own absurd situations. They don't offer easy answers or false hopes, but they do offer something valuable: the understanding that others have faced similar challenges and managed to hold on to their dignity and humanity. Truly great art forms a kind of connection through time and space, linking us to people we'll never meet but whose lives and challenges still speak to us. Camus helps us realize that we're not alone in our struggles, even if those struggles don't have a clear solution. He sees making art as creating value, just like how making moral choices creates ethical value. We set our own standards in art through what we create and how we react to others' creations. There's no outside authority to say for sure what makes art good or bad, valuable or unimportant. Instead, we have to figure out these standards by getting involved with actual works of art and thinking about what they mean. This doesn't mean our judgments on art are random or just all about personal taste. Some pieces of art are definitely better at helping us understand our situation, see what's possible, and connect with others. Some artists show more skill, deeper understanding, or more genuine engagement with their work than others do. We can judge art based on how it affects real people in the real world, but we have to own these judgments ourselves and not rely on outside sources or fixed standards. Creating art also needs the kind of attention and engagement with real life that Camus values in his philosophy. Artists have to focus on the real details of their medium, like the specific qualities of words, colors, or sounds that make their work come alive. They can't make truly meaningful art by just following abstract rules or going after purely theoretical goals. Artists need to stay in touch with sensory experiences, emotional truths, and the practical side of their craft. This makes artistic creation part of the same kind of direct interaction with reality that Camus sees as important in other parts of life. Moreover, an artist who questions the absurd creates work that others can understand, instead of withdrawing into private worlds or complex theories. Camus appreciates art that speaks to common human experiences and concerns, not because he believes in going for the lowest common denominator in art, but because he thinks true art comes from and speaks to our shared existence as conscious beings in an uncaring universe. Art that separates too far from everyday human experience loses its strength to clarify that experience or offer solidarity to people dealing with their own forms of absurdity. An artist also shows that it's possible to find joy and satisfaction in activities that don't require a grand justification. The happiness from creating something beautiful, finding solutions to artistic challenges, or successfully communicating with an audience are all forms of fulfillment that don't rely on outside approval or cosmic meaning. They prove that we can thrive by doing things that come from our own nature and abilities, instead of following duties imposed by outside forces. This approach gives us a way to think about other parts of our lives, discovering meaning through the process itself, rather than focusing solely on reaching preset goals. Part 12. Camus's views on politics didn't come from sitting around theorizing. They sprang from real-life encounters with injustice, violence, and tricky moral questions about standing up to it. He grew up in a French-run Algeria and saw the mess of colonial rule up close, with European settlers and the local Arab and Berber folks at each other's throats. Later on, during Waptoui, he was a journalist and part of the French resistance, facing the murky waters of using violence for a just cause. These experiences taught him that politics is about clashing ideals and the real pain people suffer, and how well-meaning actions can sometimes wreak havoc. Camus' connection to Algeria and the whole debate about its independence really highlight what he got right and wrong politically. He was genuinely invested in justice for Arabs and always stood against the unfair colonial policies. As a young reporter, he shone a light on how Arab workers lived in poverty and oppression and pushed for reforms in politics and the economy. He hoped for a future where French and Arab Algerians lived together in a fair society that respected everyone's rights and dignity. But he couldn't bring himself to back Algerian independence, mainly because he feared for the European souls there, including his own mother living in Algeria. This stance put him at odds with many of his peers who saw anti-colonial struggles as inherently good. Camus thought the situation was too tangled for any simple story of goodies and baddies. He noted that many European settlers, folks like his family, were poor working-class people who had been in Algeria for generations and saw it as home. He worried independence might lead to attacks on civilians who weren't directly to blame for colonial oppression. Plus, he was concerned revolutionary nationalism might just swap one set of chains for another. When Camus famously said he'd choose his mother over abstract justice, folks took it the wrong way. He wasn't suggesting family ties should always beat out moral values, but rather that justice isn't just if it demands harming innocent people. His take was any solution to the Algerian conflict needed to keep everyone safe and respect everyone's rights, not just one group's. This view linked to his bigger belief that the ways we aim to create a just society shouldn't be unjust themselves. The Algerian struggle also shows Camus' suspicion towards big revolutionary ideas and one-size-fits-all fixes for political problems. He saw how movements that started with good reasons could turn into extreme campaigns that tolerated no dissent and ignored all limits. Algerian nationalists, like other revolutionaries, claimed to be on the right side of history, planning to win with justice someday, using violence now as a terrible necessity. Camus got why they were fighting, but worried about where their methods might lead, based on what he'd seen elsewhere. He pointed out that the Russian Revolution promised freedom for workers, but led to even harsher oppression. The French Revolution shouted about human rights, but ended in bloodshed and tyranny. Even the noblest movements often got carried away, leaving their founding ideals behind. Camus aimed to find ways to fight wrongs that wouldn't just repeat them somewhere else. He leaned towards mending things rather than breaking them down, aiming for slow improvements instead of sudden overhauls, and focusing on individual rights over sweeping collective achievements. He backed trade unions, democratic socialism, and international bodies that work to right wrongs through laws and peaceful approaches. He thought that for any real change to stick, it wasn't just about shifting who held power, but more about winning over people's hearts and minds. He pointed out that violence, regardless of its noble aims, often ended up dehumanizing both the aggressors and their targets. For him, taking a more gradual path that respected human dignity was better than rushing towards goals that demanded sacrificing current lives for future dreams. This mindset frequently put him at odds with fellow left-leaning thinkers, especially Jean-Paul Sartre and his crowd. During the tense days of the Cold War, words like engagement and commitment turned into political buzzwords, pushing intellectuals to pick a side. Sartre believed there was no room for sitting on the fence, arguing that not choosing was, in effect, siding with existing conditions. He saw revolutionary violence as a necessary step towards a fairer world and labeled Camus' views as naive, highlighting moral principles over real-world liberation. Camus, however, argued that steering clear of picking sides in clashes between different oppressive systems wasn't just playing it safe. He offered what he called a third way, opposing injustice but not subscribing to any revolutionary dogma. He stood behind certain reforms and supported specific fights but steered away from sweeping ideas about historical destiny and perfect solutions. Camus felt that intellectuals should remain independent and ready to speak truthfully to all parties involved, rather than turning into mouthpieces for any political cause. The clash with Sartre wasn't just political, it was personal, ending their friendship and leaving scars on both sides. Sartre accused Camus of abandoning the working class and maintaining the current oppressive systems, while Camus fired back at Sartre for bending the truth and justifying any means for supposedly higher goals. This debate mirrored broader tensions within Europe's left wing about tackling injustice in a world divided into capitalist and communist factions, both offering incomplete and flawed answers to humanity's troubles. Camus's views were also deeply influenced by his experiences during the Nazi occupation and the resistance. He saw firsthand how pressure could turn everyday people into either collaborators or heroes, depending on the choices they made. From this, he concluded that good and evil weren't just theoretical concepts, but arose from real human actions in specific moments. He recognized the vital role of individual bravery and moral insight when social structures fell apart and usual rules no longer applied. This shaped his belief that it wasn't just the political systems that mattered, but the character of those who ran them. Democracies couldn't ensure justice if the people didn't stand up for democratic values, and revolutions couldn't bring true freedom if they compromised that freedom for other aims. Ultimately, the quality of political life hinged on the moral fiber of individuals and their readiness to own their decisions. Thus, Camus stressed the need for moral education and cultural advancement alongside political changes. He thought that for political shifts to last, People needed to rethink how they related to each other and what it meant to be responsible members of society. In his view, literature, art, and philosophy had a role in helping people become more empathetic, morally aware, and appreciative of human dignity. Without this moral growth, politics would likely just repeat old mistakes in new ways. Part 13. Albert Camus held a lifelong bond with the Mediterranean, seeing its lands and culture as a balance to the political craziness and gloom of 20th century Europe. For him, the Mediterranean life was about being in the moment rather than getting lost in deep thoughts, cherishing the simple pleasures rather than diving into complex analysis, and choosing moderation instead of wild extremes. His view wasn't just a longing for youth or romanticizing his homeland, but a genuine belief in how people could live more truthfully and happily within their limits. In his works, the Mediterranean sun shows up as a symbol of experiencing life directly, cutting through philosophical debates and big ideas. Under the blazing North African sun, the question of life's purpose becomes less urgent than just finding some shade or quenching your thirst. The sun shifts the focus to what's right in front of you and what your body needs, steering you away from endless pondering. It sets the stage for feeling alive and appreciating simplicity over complicated philosophies. Camus didn't dismiss intellectual thought. He wanted it to stay connected to real life, arguing that philosophy often drifted away from lived experiences that originally sparked those deep questions. Mediterranean traditions, with their love for food, wine, chats, and pleasures of the flesh, remind us that life's rooted in physical and social experiences, not just in the mind. The natural desires and joys of the body offer their own kind of wisdom, balancing out purely logical insights. Through Mediterranean culture, Camus identified a way of living he called lucid indifference, a mindset that acknowledges life's harsher truths but doesn't get consumed by them. Despite centuries of conflict, hardship, and natural catastrophes, these cultures maintained a spirit of life celebration rather than getting stuck on suffering. They fostered hospitality, celebrations, art, and community, all enabling people to thrive even in tough situations. This way of life acknowledges reality's harshness, but finds joy regardless. Camus also admired how Mediterranean cultures viewed time differently than the frantic ticking of modern industrial life. They preferred the cycles of nature over straight timelines, seasons over rigid schedules, and patience over the rush of modern life. They saw contemplation and enjoying the now as valuable, not lazy or inefficient, like many productivity-focused societies might think. For Camus, this contrasting view of time seemed healthier and more humane than the unending chase for progress seen in Northern Europe and America. Camus didn't turn a blind eye to the Mediterranean's flaws. He knew about the poverty, inequality, and political issues there, while acknowledging that traditional ways could be restrictive, especially towards women and minorities. He wasn't calling for a full return to the past or ignoring the advances of technology, medicine, and democracy. Instead, he believed in picking elements from Mediterranean culture that could improve and bring humanity back into modern life without giving up its perks. The Mediterranean ethos also shaped Camus' thoughts on dealing with political and social challenges. Historically, these cultures favored talking things out, finding middle ground, and making compromises rather than pursuing outright domination or complete wins. They had built a way of living where different ethnic and religious groups lived together, though not perfectly, that challenged the ethnic nationalism and pushed for ideological purity that caused so much trouble in Europe during the 20th century. This idea showed that diversity was a strength, not a weakness, and that different lifestyles could support each other instead of posing threats. Camus saw the Mediterranean as offering a middle ground between Northern Europe's extreme rationalism and the deep mysticism found in some Eastern traditions. Mediterranean culture appreciated reason, but it didn't put it on a pedestal above other human attributes. While it embraced mystery and transcendence, it didn't use these as reasons to ignore critical thinking or the solving of real-world problems. This culture struck a balance that allowed people to stay genuinely human, avoiding the extremes of becoming either just minds or just spirits. For Camus, the Mediterranean ideal also informed how people should relate to nature. These cultures had developed over time in tandem with specific landscapes and climates, learning to work with natural patterns instead of trying to completely overpower or escape them. This provided an example of living sustainably and being content without resorting to exploiting nature or entirely dismissing technology. They showed it was possible for people to feel at home in the world without needing to reshape everything to fit human desires. Camus' appreciation for Mediterranean values went hand in hand with his view that people needed a connection to specific places and cultures to truly thrive. While the widespread, rootless nature of modern intellectual life had its benefits, it also risked leading to a sort of spiritual disconnection, making real engagement with life harder. People needed a sense of belonging, a link to traditions and landscapes that helped form a solid identity, one that could underpin true rebellion and strong solidarity. However, this connection to roots should be chosen and thoughtful, not just inherited and unexamined. For Camus, the Mediterranean way was about being rooted without becoming closed off, traditional without becoming inflexible, valuing the past without getting stuck in it. It offered ways of living well that didn't rely on a strict ideology or metaphysical commitments. Instead, it suggested finding satisfaction and meaning in the present moment, nurturing personal relationships, and appreciating the beauty of nature. These were modest aspirations, not promising ultimate fulfillment, but capable of delivering real happiness for those willing to accept their limits and explore their possibilities. This Mediterranean outlook also colored Camus' writing style and artistic tastes. He prized clarity over confusion, concreteness over vague ideas, and preferred subtle emotion to over-the-top displays. His writing aimed for a clear simplicity, much like Mediterranean architecture, focusing on functional beauty that met human needs without excess decoration or needless complexity. He believed true art, like true living, should stay connected to everyday human experiences and remain accessible to those who hadn't undergone special training in art or philosophical theory. Part 14. In the Fall, the last novel Albert Camus finished, he dives deep into how he's been evolving in his thoughts about what makes us human, our moral duties, and how one might live an authentic life. The story is shaped as a sort of confession where Jean-Baptiste Clémence, who used to be a lawyer in Paris and now serves as a judge penitent in Amsterdam's bars, spills his thoughts. Clémence's long talk shows how even our good intentions and strong moral beliefs can get twisted because of pride, fooling ourselves, and wanting to feel better than others. He starts out talking about his old life as a successful lawyer who fought for those in need. He wouldn't even charge for his services, stood for good causes, and built a name for himself as a champion of justice and human rights. Clémence saw himself as the good guy, a beacon of virtue in a murky world of moral confusion and compromise. He got a kick out of people admiring him and loved the feeling that he was making a real difference. He saw himself as a kind of moral champion, someone who took the hard route of staying good in a rotten society. But as his story unfolds, Clemens admits that even his most selfless deeds were partly driven by a need to feel above others. Helping was right, sure, but also boosting his self-image and putting himself on a pedestal above people who weren't as big-hearted. His whole thing of seeming virtuous brought him perks and social prestige. Even when he really cared about justice, it was sometimes tangled with pride and looking down on folks who didn't seem morally on the ball. Everything changes for him when he sees a woman dive off a bridge into the Seine and doesn't lift a finger to help. He hears her cry, watches her fall, and stays put. He justifies it to himself. It's too late, too cold. He couldn't have saved her anyhow. But deep down, he knows it was just about saving his own skin, flying in the face of everything he thought he was about. This forces him to face the difference between who he thought he was and how he acted when it really mattered. Clémence calls this his fall from innocence. It opens his eyes to the self-interest and moral flimsy bits hiding in his past. The actions he once saw as virtuous now look like sneaky selfishness and ego, and his supposedly generous relationships seem all about manipulation and self-service. His whole self-image as a good guy falls apart as he recognizes the self-deception behind even his most praised actions. Overwhelmed by this new understanding, Clemens takes up a new view on life and work. He becomes not just a judge, but a judge who confesses, using his own missteps to get others to reflect on theirs. By being upfront about his flaws, he nudges others to take a hard look at themselves, creating a platform where he can point out others' flaws. His admission, rather than a humble act, turns into a tool to critique others' moral smugness, suggesting they're not any better than he is. This kind of honesty lets him hold a moral high ground, with his modesty serving as a backward sense of pride, and his self-criticism turning into a way to claim the upper hand over those less candid with their failings. Clemence's way of doing things showcases a clever but bleak sort of moral thinking. It admits human frailty, yet uses that understanding to skip out on real moral duties. By saying everyone is equally at fault, he wipes out the chance for meaningful ethical distinctions. By bearing his own sins, he gets to judge others without fearing judgment back. In accepting his own flaws, he sidesteps the hard work of trying to live better despite them. His view gives the false comfort of cynicism, lacking in true despair's honesty or authentic rebellion's bravery. Camus uses the fall to show what happens when understanding life's absurdity leads not to real rebellion, but to cunning forms of deceit and moral dodging. In Clemence, we see someone who's learned just enough about humanity to grow cynical, but not enough to become truly understanding. He's spotted the moral showboating, but hasn't actually grasped true moral understanding. He's noticed people's shortcomings, but doesn't take any responsibility for working within those limits. He carries a type of phony wisdom that sees human flaws as a way not to bother with morals. The novel delves into the risks of moral arrogance and how even real virtue can get tainted by a pat on our own back. Clemence once truly stood for justice, but his need to feel better than everyone else muddied those waters. His crash wasn't due to a lack of virtue, but because pride snuck into his decency and left him fragile when push came to shove. The story hints that true ethical behavior requires more than just good intentions. It needs a sincere understanding of oneself and a readiness to act without seeking a pat on the back. Amsterdam's layout, with its circling canals and misty ambience, perfectly mirrors the moral murkiness and self-delusion that Clemence both represents and dissects. The city straddles the line between urban and natural, land and water. Its looping waterways give the feeling of being stuck, going round in circles with no way out. The fog blurs clarity and hinders finding one's way. Everything in Amsterdam feels a tad surreal and morally vague, much like the mental environment Clemence lives and narrates in. The Fall is Camus at his most downbeat take on human nature and moral potential. Unlike his earlier pieces that held on to the idea that real rebellion and true companionship were still achievable, this tale suggests even our most earnest attempts at living morally can be sabotaged by ego, self-delusion, and our unshakable need to feel above others. It questions if acting morally might just be another way to dodge life's real challenges. The book ponders whether true virtue is even feasible for those aware of their own virtue and who get a kick out of doing good deeds. Yet it's not all doom and gloom. By showing Clemence's clever dodges and moral flim-flam, it points us subtly toward more genuine ways to handle moral complexities and human frailties. By highlighting the perils of moral vanity, it hints at actions motivated by love, not superiority. As it examines skewered judgment, it nudges towards compassion that doesn't pass judgment. The Fall acts as a cautionary tale for anyone trying to walk the ethical line, but doesn't shut the door on the chance of real moral action. Part 15, Legacy and the Ongoing Significance of Rebellion. Albert Camus met an untimely end in a car crash in 1960 at just 46, right when his influence and creativity were at their peak. His passing meant a significant loss of a crucial voice dealing with the pressing moral and political issues of our time. But even though his career was short, the ideas he put forward continue to resonate with people today who grapple with the same essential questions he did. How do we maintain our dignity in a universe that seems to lack meaning? How do we stand against injustice without becoming unjust ourselves? How do we forge human connections without losing our individual identities? In many ways, Camus' thoughts have only grown more pertinent since his death. The firm beliefs that shaped much of the 20th century political scene have largely faded, and this shift has left many people searching for ways to face societal problems without resorting to sweeping ideologies. The looming environmental crisis pushes us to urgently reconsider our relationship with nature. As globalization links us in new ways, it also breeds feelings of disconnection and alienation. Meanwhile, advances in technology bring new opportunities but also pose risks of increased surveillance and control. In light of these issues, Camus' take on rebellion within bounds, his focus on real human experience over dry theory, and his dedication to balancing personal dignity with collective unity offer valuable insights today. Modern political movements often find themselves revisiting the ideas Camus explored long ago. The civil rights movement in America reflected his belief that rebellion was about affirming universal human dignity, not just advocating for narrow group interests. Figures like Martin Luther King Jr. exemplified how to combat injustice using methods that aligned with the very values they aimed to defend. During the 1980s, the solidarity efforts in Eastern Europe illustrated how everyday individuals could defy oppressive regimes by simply refusing to live in falsehoods, a principle Camus supported. Environmental advocates have recognized his criticism of humanity's quest for absolute control over nature, echoing his call for more respectful and sustainable interactions with our environment. Camus' philosophy also gives us tools to critique current movements when they stray from their original values. His thoughts on how rebellion can morph into revolution provide insights into how efforts for social justice might risk becoming repressive. He stressed the need for aligning means with ends, guiding us to assess whether certain strategies truly advance their proclaimed goals or not. Moreover, his caution against the pitfalls of moral absolutism and ideological rigor offers a warning for movements in danger of becoming dogmatic or intolerant. Camus' ideas are especially relevant in the face of today's technological dilemmas. While social media and digital communication create opportunities for connection, they also open doors for manipulation and surveillance. Breakthroughs in artificial intelligence and biotech promise solutions to human troubles, but also raise crucial concerns about human identity and boundaries we shouldn't cross. The reality of climate change and environmental damage forces us to face the impacts of modern society's quest to dominate nature, something Camus critiqued. His emphasis on setting limits and respecting human dignity amidst technological advancements offers key viewpoints. Camus' writings continue to attract new readers who see themselves in his exploration of feelings of alienation, the quest for authenticity, and the search for purpose in a seemingly purposeless world. The stranger connects with those who feel detached in their communities, struggling against societal norms that often feel pointless or deceitful. The plague resonates with anyone who's lived through times when the usual social order collapses, prompting a reevaluation of what truly matters. And the fall compels readers to confront their own motivations and ethical pretenses with stark honesty. These pieces of work have impact not because they hand out easy solutions or make us feel all warm and fuzzy inside. Instead, they push us to really think about our lives and choices. Camus kicked off a philosophical movement that still carries on today. Modern thinkers who share his dedication to human dignity, his wariness of all-encompassing ideologies, and his focus on real-life experiences rather than lofty theories continue this tradition. Feminist thinkers have broadened his views on rebellion to tackle issues like male dominance and gender oppression. Post-colonial scholars have used his thoughts on the flaws of revolutionary ideology to look at freedom movements in places that are still developing. Meanwhile, environmental philosophers have taken his critique of human arrogance and turned it into a deep challenge against human-centered thinking and unsustainable economies. But Camus' philosophy isn't flawless, and modern thinkers can definitely find room to critique it. His focus on personal rebellion and authenticity sometimes overlooks how important it is to stand together and act as a group. His love for Mediterranean values and European culture can come off as narrow-minded in today's melting pot world. Though his critique of revolutionary movements includes crucial insights, it might also deter people from standing up against oppression. While his ideas make a great guide for personal ethics, they don't quite cut it as a roadmap for social change. These shortcomings don't erase the value of Camus' insights, but they highlight where his philosophy could use some beefing up from other ideas. Today's readers are tasked with learning from him while also tweaking his insights for the new challenges he couldn't foresee. To do this, we've got to embrace that same creative rebellion he was so fond of. It's about rejecting tidy solutions and embarking on crafting fresh chances for human dignity and unity. Perhaps the most lasting part of Camus' legacy is how he showed that you can live with purpose and integrity without needing to have all the answers to life's big questions. He made it clear that people can carve out meaning and worth from their actions and commitments, even when the universe isn't giving any thumbs up. He showed you can stand up against wrongdoing and pain without needing perfect knowledge of righteousness or promising to erase suffering completely. Through his lens, solidarity and compassion come from acknowledging our shared limits, not from a universal truth. In today's world, riddled with clashes, extremes, and ideological battles, Camus presents a different way to tackle disagreements. Instead of insisting others see the world as we do, we can find connections in our shared uncertainties, our mortality, and our common longing for dignity. Instead of shooting for faultless fixes to complicated issues, we could aim for small, positive changes that lessen suffering and broaden opportunities for a good life. The image of Sisyphus continually pushing that boulder uphill only to watch it tumble down captures the essence of the human experience and response according to Camus. We're all in some way pushing up our own boulders, whether raising kids who will face their own battles, building structures that will eventually crumble, creating art that might one day be forgotten, or fighting injustices that will reemerge in a new skin. The real question isn't if we can ever win in perpetuity, but if we can find pride and fulfillment simply in the act of striving. Camus' answer is yes, if we choose to live with truth, bravery, and solidarity. His philosophy doesn't offer ultimate comforts, final answers, or predictable outcomes. But it does offer something possibly more important, a way to remain fully human in a world that can often seem hostile to our very humanity. It reminds us that we have the power to stand up to the ridiculousness of life without becoming ridiculous ourselves. We can battle injustice without turning unjust, and we can bring beauty and meaning to the world without needing those things to stick around forever. At the heart of it all, perhaps this is the deepest kind of rebellion we can muster. The act of not letting a universe that doesn't care decide how we react to it. While we might not pick our circumstances, we can definitely choose how we deal with them. In making that decision, we find both our freedom and our dignity as aware beings who choose to embrace life, even when it seems easier to just give up.